Thank you, Madam Chair. That your rights are not unlimited they're certainly limited by responsibility, but they're not to be infringed. And that infringement is what we're talking, not just infringement, we're talking about a gross infringement today. And I do appreciate my colleagues' perspective. I appreciate knowing what's going on in the world. But what we have is we don't have a gun problem. What we have is a culture problem. And you're trying to pave over a culture problem by creating a bigger problem by calling it a gun problem, because you're not going to get to the root of the problem. Because if your community has a problem with shootings, it has a problem with life in that it does not value life. So we should probably get to the point where we look at why do we have communities that don't value life? Because yes, we would all like to prevent mass shootings. And in the time, I'm not going to take the time to run through the statistics about the millions of crimes each year that are prevented by somebody having a weapon, brandishing a weapon if need be. I have friends that's happened to. Somebody is approaching them, they bring out their concealed carry tool of self-defense, and the situation is diffused. Because a firearm is a force leveler, and it prevents the tyranny, an imposition of tyranny by one person upon another, or even a government upon another. And that is what is built into our Declaration of Independence as to why it shall not be infringed. And when we look at why every time that these, what you would call reasonable infringements are reasonable, well, if you go back and you say, well, every time they happen, they have not solved the problem. The problem has become worse. You can look at cities like Chicago, Boston, Los Angeles, any place that has high density housing and a low regard for life. You are going to have a problem with those types of illegal activities, and those are illegal activities. Shooting somebody is illegal. So you're not dealing, but this bill does not deal with criminals. This does not deal with criminal weapons. This does not deal with criminals. This deals specifically with law-abiding citizens. This only deals with law-abiding citizens and turning them into criminals. So if you want to look at history and why the Declaration of Independence would go into the fifth that of the self-evident truth that when any other form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, to institute a new government, laying its foundations and principles, organizing its powers in such form as to them seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient reasons, and accordingly all experience hath shown that all mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. So what does it tell me when a government says citizens cannot have a gun? And history shows, again, that when the government says you don't need a gun, you need a gun. And history really shows that when a socialist says you don't need a gun, you really need a gun. Because if we look at around the world and we say, 1911, Turkey disarmed the citizens. 1.5 million were slaughtered. Were those lives not important? 1929, Russia, citizens disarmed. 20 million Russians murdered. 1935, China, citizens disarmed. 20 million Chinese killed. 1938, Germany, citizens disarmed. 6 million Jews murdered. And then obviously many more. That's only one demographic. 1956, Cambodia, citizens disarmed. 1 million intellectuals killed. 1964, Guatemala, citizens disarmed. 100,000 Mayan Indians massacred. 1970, Uganda, citizens disarmed. 300,000 Christians put to death. Now we could add to those Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela. Millions. Now, it has been said that when one person is killed, that's a tragedy. When millions are killed, that's just a statistic. But each and every one of these people was a real human being. And the fact that they were all murdered in the name of social justice or in the name of social evolution doesn't make their murder less of a murder. Now, if you want to look at where the murders occur, put the impositions there. Where do they occur? Denver. Why are we looking at legislating across all of Colorado for a problem that is largely one of high population density and a very specific regulatory style? But instead of dealing with the actual problem, instead, it's imposed new restrictions, new restrictions on the rest of Colorado, who doesn't have this problem. And again, these restrictions are only on law-abiding citizens. So when I was thinking about this with Thomas Jefferson, I thought, well, they looked at history. And those are all at post-Thomas Jefferson. So how would he have known? How would they have known? How would the founders have known? And I thought, oh, well, a perfect example would be the conquistadors. And we have lots of names in here, so I think that's a proud heritage of the lineage of the conquistadors and the passing on of those names. In 1487, Aztec priests would slice open the chest of the victims with their obsidian knives.
Representative DeGraaf, just urge you to stay on the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. This is about force leveling.
I'm sorry?
This is about force leveling and why Thomas Jefferson would have included this.
I urge you to focus on the policy before you, and the argument needs to relate to the outline and the content of the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try again. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to be a force leveling, is to resist tyranny, not just against the unlawful deprivation of life, liberty, or property by an individual or a government, but it's also an auxiliary right to resist tyranny. And the example would be one that Thomas Jefferson would be with which he would be familiar, and that is of the Aztecs. And the reason that the conquistadors were recruited by the vassal states of the Aztecs is because the vassal states of the Aztecs were not fond of being recruited to be human sacrifice. And so when the conquistadors showed up, Hernan Cortez and his merry men, perhaps, then they were recruited because they had firearms, because the vassal states were not fond of having themselves and their relatives sacrificed to the gods of war or the gods of weather. So these ideas that humans need to have a force level, have to be protected from their government, goes way back in time. It's not just a matter of new socialist governments killing their people wantonly. This goes back to the beginning of humankind, and that's why it was ensconced. So I think that's an excellent example. Hernan Cortez leveled the playing field, removed all the people from the tyranny of the Aztec Empire, sacrificing the vassal states, people of the vassal states, for whim.
Representative DeGraaf, you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill, I disagree with my colleague in 80% that this would take, because this takes the 2 or 3 page definition of every single what it calls assault weapons, even includes pistols, includes pistol grips. Pistols have pistol grips. Any semi-automatic. And I'll contend that I think this really only would allow smoothbore flintlock muskets in some way, single-shot flintlock muskets in some way, shape, or form. This is a gross overstep. And before we even had any talk about any sort of agreement to civility, and I'm all for that, we took an oath which far exceeds that. This is not an oath. This is not just some random allegiance to a piece of paper. This is an oath that we took to support our Constitution as founded in the Declaration of
Representative DeGraaf,
Independence.
your time has expired. Representative Frizzell?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I spoke on this bill on Friday,